Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our third Thiel Forum of this academic year. We have an especially impressive array of presenters today with quite diverse and interesting topics. Our first presenter is Dr. Melissa Borgia-Askey, who is in her second year here as Assistant Professor of English. Third year. Wow, tempus fugit. Today she will discuss her research on the efforts to rescue the language and culture of the Seneca people from near extinction. In the spring semester, she will also be conducting a seminar on this topic that's cross-listed for both the English department and the Seminar 400 Global Issues course. So this presentation is a preview of coming attractions. I'm proud to present my department colleague, Dr. Borgia-Askey, as she presents Seneca Allegheny Making Strides Since Kinzua.
I just said I'm thankful that you are all here. And that's about the limit of the Seneca language that I know. So, I'm going to talk to you about, obviously I'm not rescuing this language. The people themselves are trying to revitalize the language. And so I'm going to highlight two of my friends, Dar and Gajeso Dowdy. This is their school, Borgia-Askey Hinodeista. And what that means is the teachings of our longhouse, which I'll kind of explain that. Those are some students from the past. But first, before I talk about them, I need to give you a little context. So I'll just talk about where they're located, a little brief history, some of the threats to the land and language. I don't have enough time for all of them, unfortunately. And the effect of the Kinzu Dam, which you may have heard of, be aware of, have been to. And then what they're doing to kind of correct all these problems that were thrust upon them. So these are my friends. This is an old picture. Dar and Gajeso, they're husband and wife. He was a faith keeper, a leader in his community, and she's a leading educator in the community. And this is their territory where they are now. You can kind of see the map of faint outline of Pennsylvania and New York State. The Senecas were dispersed, like all native groups have been dispersed, away from their homelands and away from each other. The Senecas have territory there along the Allegheny River, the Kinzu Reservoir, but also up on Lake Erie. You might drive through that on I-90 through on the way to Buffalo. That's some of their territory. And they have other territory, the Tonawanda Reservation in Buffalo too. And they're a member of the now 6 tribes, used to be 5 tribes, the Mohawk, the Cayuga, the Oneida, Onondaga, Seneca, and now Tuscarora. So you might have heard of some of them. And this was their ancestral land base, as it's argued, and the Seneca are the purple. And they spread around, though. They were a warring group of people, and not so much anymore, but their land base has spread to this area. Conneaut, for instance, is a Seneca word. Aliquippa, Seneca, so Pittsburgh, even the original name, Diondigat is a Seneca word too. But the revolution, American Revolution, is what caused their downfall mostly, it's argued, because they sided with the British, and we all know the British lost. So the land that you saw that was in purple here, this is what it became after the Revolutionary War. There are a lot of other reasons. I don't really have a lot of time to go into that. But they suffered about a 95% loss after the Revolution. And it happened over a series of treaties through the 1780s. Also some bribery and some deception and a little bit of rum, and a lot of those things happened to create one of the earliest reservation systems in 1797. So fast forward a little bit to 1855 to 1955. One of the other threats besides the revolution was outside Europeans, especially coming to proselytize them into Christianity. And they created boarding schools. And I don't know if you know this, but on the way up to Buffalo, along I-90, in that spot of land there is the Thomas Indian School, which operated between 1855 and 1955. Those two folks I showed you in the beginning both attended that school. Some attended voluntarily, some involuntarily, and I'm just going to show you a little snippet of some of the effects of that. And whoops, I have to go to, whoops. Why didn't you tell me I did that? There we go. Oh, whoops. Sorry, here it is.
They were just considered bad people, bad children, but they weren't bad children, okay? They were placed there for so many different reasons, but not because of any kind of delinquency on their part. But that is not how they were treated.
We went from washing up in the morning, and they marched us to the chow hall, where we ate. Everything was routine. It was like the military.
One of the superintendents during the time that my mother was there actually came from correctional services. And so because that person came with that kind of a background in corrections and working in penitentiaries, that's exactly how he decided that Thomas Indian School would be operated. Children marched from here to there, just everything, had its place. I talked to some of the men who went there. I would say majority of them went into the military.
So what I don't have time to get into, this film, which I can give you links to if you're interested, it goes into a lot of people talking about emotional and sexual abuse that they suffered, and a lot of other traumas. And it's just one of the schools. You've probably heard of Carlisle Indian School. They're having a problem right now just trying to resurrect their bones and repatriate them back to their homeland. So that's one of the things. This is going to be depressing, but don't worry, I'll lift you up at the end a little bit here. Another thing was the building of the Kinzig Dam, which broke the Treaty of 1794, which guaranteed their land. I'm going to show you how that happened in a minute. But this is a film that they made, part of a film they made. Engineers did this work for them.
These are the hills of our grandfathers. These are the forests in which our grandfathers hunted for thousands of years. This is the river of our grandfathers, Ohio, the beautiful river, the good river. These are the houses of our grandfathers, keepers of the western door of the Iroquois League. If English is the official language of North America, it is because we Iroquois sided with England in the French and Indian Wars of the 18th century. We helped to drive the French out of Canada. In the American Revolution, we fought again on the British side, but this time we lost. In 1794, George Washington gave to Seneca 30,000 acres of land along the Allegheny River as our permanent home. We have lived here for 2 centuries, almost unnoticed. Our existence, one of silence and slow time.
He owns everything, but we are here to live in it and enjoy it.
The Koshan The great blue herons are gone. The ospreys are gone. The kingfishers left too. A river is a living thing, and like any living thing, it can be killed. One community member said, "We had so much, and they took it all away." Another woman said, "We had so little, yet they took it all away."
That's just a snippets of that movie. They produced it themselves. It's available at their museum. If you're interested in it, I can help you find that. So this is the territory. This is along I-86 if you've gone that way through New York. And they used to have land right before that dam was built in Pennsylvania, the corn planter grant that Washington granted to corn planter, and that's no longer. Obviously, they don't have any land in Pennsylvania anymore. So it flooded this reservation here, and I'll show you to what degree. I've seen different numbers, but 550 to 600 people were removed, and about a third of that territory. So almost 10,000 acres were flooded. Actually, they were set aside for flooding, but the Army Corps decided that it had to go, their space had to go up to, I think it's like 1,450 feet above sea level, but only a fraction of that is actually underwater when they fill up the dam in the summer. So you can still go along their old roads of their old towns, and they'll tell you, you know, that's where Joe lived, and that was the school, and that was the corner store. There were cemeteries. One of the elders told me about 13 cemeteries, I think, had to be relocated. They had to exhume the bodies. And these were graves of their leaders during the Revolutionary War. Their religious leaders. Handsome Lake is their central religious leader. It destroyed their longhouse, which is basically, for our purposes, a church. So this is the longhouse that was destroyed. And then today they mark it with a sign. You can see that the spot where it was is not underwater. But some argue that that's a good way to put people down, is to destroy their religious base. So today it's not all bad. Most Indian nations that are able, since the probably 1980s, have been going through revival in terms of language and culture. And this is Dar talking about the issues he's facing. This is from several years ago. He passed away in 2011. Some students made this video several years back.
I made a commitment a long time ago when I became a faith keeper. This is my life now. The culture and traditions and our way of life. That's what we have. Native Americans have a way of life. This is who we are.
20, 30 years from now, I don't know what the language is going to be. We've been traumatized for 500 years. And we're still walking around. And we're still carrying the heartbreak. And we're still got tears in our eyes. This place is just a survival school. This building that we got here is just surviving. We're trying to survive as Senecas for a little while longer. The important part is trying to keep who we are as people, as Native American. We're going through some tough times right now. All nations, not just us. This is all the Iroquois Confederacy. All the Oneidas, Onondagas, Cayugas, Senecas, Mohawks, we're all the same. We're all in the same boat.
We enter a point in our life where we know the days are numbered. This was a prophecy. In 1972, they said, there will be a time when our children will no longer speak from the heart, but they will begin to speak from their minds. And the day that that happens, that's the day that we as Indian people will cease to exist.
It's happening today. We're witnessing. I'm witnessing.
All our things that we teach has been brought down verbally. All our history has been passed down from generation to generation for the last 2,000 years.
We're getting into the season now where we're having powwows.
So that's a series of a couple of videos, 3 videos you can see on YouTube, and I'd love to show more, and I'd love to share it with you if you'd like to know. They talk about what they're trying to do. So these are the statistics. Wallace Chaffee is the principal linguist that works with the language. They're in dire condition. Dar and Sandy or Kajessa are among the youngest speakers, and now he's not with us anymore, so she's carrying on. Mostly by herself, but through her family. A lot of her family members teach at that school now. I wanted to show you about how they commemorate the building of the dam every September. They get together and walk along and sing and show where everybody lived and the condition of everything. I don't really have time to get into that. They reenact some things. They have a Facebook page. If you're interested, you can take a look at that. I can share that with you. There's a fundraiser coming up that I'm going to go to. But this is them today. Now this is Dar and Sandy's granddaughter who's teaching the youngest children's with TPR. You know about that? So they're running the school there now with Montessori certification. They like Montessori because it matches kind of the way they traditionally taught their kids. They have over 20 kids now, and they're going to start teaching older kids than that pretty soon with the help of Administration of Native Americans grant. So these are my sources. If you're interested, this is how you can help. That's all I have. Is there time? Yeah. Questions?
What are going to be some of the ways you're expanding on this in the class that you're teaching?
Well, the class is about land and language revival, and so this is just one microcosm of a lot of nations are doing this. I'll go all around the world. She started out using a language nest, which was popularized and very effective in New Zealand and Hawaii. The Maoris are really reviving their language. It's doing really well. Hawaiian's pretty healthy too. So we'll look at that. We'll look at Welsh. Actually, that was kind of the forerunners to the New Zealand and Hawaii, believe it or not. So Welsh almost disappeared, and they're bringing it back as a cultural tool, the Sami in Finland, and there are so many. The Ainu in Japan, there are a lot of parallels, and the revival all started happening in a lot of these places in the 70s and 80s. So this is just a microcosm, and usually obviously, as you see, where the land base is eroded, the language erodes. And so we'll just kind of look at how those two things kind of go hand in hand and kind of problematize that and see, there are arguments, obviously, why it's inevitable, but there are arguments that it's not inevitable. So we'll think about that.
When did the Senecan language become written, and how did that happen?
That's very interesting. So Asher Wright was a Presbyterian, I think, in the mid-1800s. Actually, before him, there was some French and Dutch tried unsuccessfully, but the Presbyterian missionaries that started that boarding school, ironically enough, started a linguistic system and writing it down. The system you see now is Wallace Chaffee's. He's a wonderful fella out of Santa Barbara, and he started writing it in the 70s that way. Actually, he tried to change it a few times, but the people themselves, he meets with them and asks them, how should we write this? How should we? It's pretty cool to watch those meetings, and that's what they've decided to adopt together. It's really hard to read. It's really hard. It's phonetic. So, in fact, if you see the O's with the little dots over it, that's a nasalized, and my friend always says, just picture that's your nostrils, right? So it's like they're almost pictograph, but it's not. These are linguistic symbols. Really hard. There's arguments about whether they should write it or not, because it's traditionally not a written language. So my friend Sandy tries to not use the writing if she doesn't have to. But with adults, you kind of have to, because they become accustomed to that. But the kids don't know any different, so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. We hope the language perseveres for many, many years. Our next presenter is Dr. James Koshan, Chair and Professor of History. He spent time last fall on his sabbatical experience in Gettysburg, Maryland, focusing on historical site visits, reenactments, battlefields, and military history. Today he will discuss his experiences and research from 2013 to the present, with emphasis on his fall 2015 sabbatical research. Dr. Koshan has served as a full-time professor at Thiel since 1999. I am proud to present my colleague, Dr. Jim Koshan, as he presents Traveler in Time, Journeys of Historical Exhilaration, 2013 to the present.
Well, first of all, thank all of you for coming today. Traveler in Time, the first thing you'll notice is it's spelled with two L's. This is an English spelling based on a song from Uriah Heep, one of my favorite bands from the 1970s, and music often accompanies me when I go on these trips since 2013. The framework of the project came around in 2013, of course, intensive travel to historic sites, battlefields, and reenactments to better integrate war and society into military history courses, which we are revitalizing in the department, along with supplemental reading and research to integrate the social history themes of immigrant and African American military participation, which I am especially interested in, and of course a sabbatical leave in 2015 for extended travel and timely reenactments to fulfill the project's goals more definitively. The inspiration for the project, as you might imagine, is my parents. That's me. In Fredericksburg, Virginia, with my mother and with my dad in Yorktown, Virginia. We oftentimes traveled in the summer. My dad worked in the mill all the time. I didn't see him very much, so summer trips gained a special interest to me, and we had a lot of fun on those things and wanted to, of course, carry that forward as much as possible. So that was the inspiration. Where else to start but Gettysburg? In 2013, it was the Gettysburg, Pennsylvania 150th reenactment, which is a historic event in and of itself, because there will be more, or was more, reenactors there than there will be for a very, very long time since. Funny story, 114-degree heat index, 2 hours in the line. I waited with tickets, only to be told when I came up to get in the stands there were no more seats. So I weaseled my way in another way, And the best seat I got was on stairs. So that's the picture I took by holding my rather primitive now digital camera. It's at the culmination of Pickett's charge that came at us against the Union lines there. Next to me is Gary Whitla, Thiel class of 2012. He was in political science. He's now in law school. He's a reenactor, as you can imagine. Gary and I had worked together on a project, an honors project, looking at Civil War interpretations. And of course, I'm looking very wet because right at the end of the reenactment, the clouds burst and just soaked everybody, but everybody in the wool uniforms were quite happy to have that happen. 2014, some more context here, the French and Indian War sites I visited across the state of New York. That's Fort Niagara on the left, Fort Ticonderoga on the right. These are state sites, not as maintained as well as the National Park Service does theirs. Fort Niagara is in really good shape. I also was there for a reenactment of the French and Indian War. On the right, Fort Ticonderoga, which is much bigger, near Lake Champlain, is falling apart because the state doesn't have enough money to distribute around. It's rather sad. Now to 2015, the sabbatical excursions. I planned for 3 the fall of 2015, an American Civil War trip to Virginia and Maryland in September to cover the 1862 and 64 Valley campaigns of the Civil War, and then the Monocacy and Antietam battlefields. And then the Northwest Indian Wars, War of 1812 trip to Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana in October to hit such places as River Raisin, Fort Meigs, Fallen Timbers, Tippecanoe, and Mississinewa, which ironically is the location of the largest War of 1812 reenactment in Indiana. And then finally, the big trip, American Civil War, War of 1812 trip to Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, Louisiana, starting at Bowling Green, Shiloh, Corinth, Vicksburg, and because we were ending up in New Orleans, my fiance decided to accompany me this time because she wanted to eat the great food there. So a little bit about Antietam in 2015, second only to Gettysburg. Among my favorite sites, have been there often. You see the Dunker Church, which is a recognized landmark on the left. A pacifist Dunker German sect ran this church, and it became the bloodiest single battlefield day, or bloodiest day during the war of the entire Civil War. On the right is one of my favorite places to visit is Burnside's Bridge. There's something with bridges that I really like in many of these Civil War fields and other battlefields. Very heartening to be on these bridges. Mississinewa, living history, of course, full of reenactments. On the left are some Native American reenactors who could possibly have been Seneca by this time, but were probably more likely Chippewa, Potawatomi, and some Great Lakes Native American region Indians who were still fighting for the British, fighting in their own right against a series of wars in the 1790s, and of course on the British side in the War of 1812. On the right side are some Canadian reenactors that I talked to that were portraying the Glengarry Light Infantry. It's hard to tell here, but the figure on the left is a woman, and many women would cross gender roles to dress up as male soldiers in these reenactments, as well as portray traditional female roles as well. So this was a lot of fun, an encampment and a reenactment in eastern Indiana. Then finally, the big trip getting to Shiloh Battlefield in Tennessee. Notice once again a church. This small Methodist meeting house became the center of another battle earlier than Antietam. It was one of the bloodiest battles early on in the Civil War West. By the way, Shiloh means place of peace. So once again, you have this juxtaposition of violence and peacefulness. On the right, my obsession with cannons continues ever since I was a child, so I have many photographs of me with artillery or just the artillery pieces themselves, and couldn't pass on having this one taken either. From the books, Vicksburg Courthouse, Mississippi. What I mean by this is, as a child, I was obviously fascinated by the Civil War, reading Bruce Canton's illustrated volumes, and the picture on the left is one of the photographs I will always remember, with the Vicksburg Courthouse on top. So I got to visit the courthouse, got my picture taken in front of it by my fiance, and this was not only very important to me, sort of third only to Gettysburg, but looking at this war in the West, Vicksburg held the key to the war by being on the Mississippi, and this became a very exciting moment for me to finally fulfill what I had only seen in books and now was able to visit as well. Oh, by the way, I wrote a paper about Vicksburg in 9th grade. It was my first research paper, and I got an A. Also from the books as well, the Cairo, and yes, that's how it's pronounced. The Cairo was one of several ironclads that the Union Army used, especially in attacking Vicksburg because it was along the Mississippi. And as you can see on the right, it was actually resurrected. It had been sunk in one of the nearby rivers, tributaries to the Mississippi, and they have pulled it up, reconstructed part of it, but if you look closely at the base there, you can see that's all original, and you can walk around it and actually through it. And that was a very fascinating experience to have, to see this ironclad, at least half of which was original. And of course, I went through the extensive Vicksburg siege lines as well, but we won't have time for that one today. Finally, to Louisiana. Donna looking forward to the food. I made a quick beeline south of the city for the War of 1812's climax, which was the Chalmette battlefield, which is part of the National Park Service today. This is the place where Andrew Jackson and his motley collection of pirates, people of color, Tennessee and Kentucky militiamen, all sorts of folks, even some Choctaw natives, fought in a huge line against the pride of the British Army, fresh from victories in the Napoleonic Wars, and they killed over 1,000 men on this battlefield. So Line Jackson, which I stood upon, which I probably wasn't allowed to stand on, but I did so anyhow, looking one direction and the other. And this battle need not to have been fought, as many as you know, because the peace treaty had been signed about 3 weeks earlier. This past summer, I wanted to also go to the west and hit some of the battlefields that my fiance and I didn't get to. I tried to hit a couple of them on the way home, and she remarked, of course, must you look at every piece of ground? So I decided I would wait a year and go myself, and went to, starting in Perryville, Kentucky, going to Fort Donelson, then going around Nashville, all the way down to Chattanooga, Tennessee, where I could visit nearby Chickamauga. The photograph on the left is of the city of Chattanooga today from Lookout Mountain, which was one of the Confederate strongholds. After they won the Battle of Chickamauga, they were able to surround Chattanooga and threaten the Union advance in the left. Eventually, Ulysses S. Grant was able to break out of this, but some very fascinating and very beautiful pictures from the top of the mountain. So I decided to put another mountain in there. I made a side trip to Kennesaw Mountain in Georgia. This was one of the last places that the Confederacy was going to try to defend before the city of Atlanta. And you can't see it too well, but if you look right there, you can see the buildings of Atlanta from the top of Kennesaw Mountain. So that was a treat for me to get all that way down as well. And the more I think about it, it is the war in the West. It is that part of the Civil War struggle that was won by the Union Army and became much more important than the East. The Civil War was definitely won in the West. One of my major themes, as I mentioned, were immigrants in the American Civil War. Immigrants played a large role. Some 25% of the Union Army, by the end of the war, was made up of foreign-born soldiers. On the left, you have the Iron Brigade monument to an Irish brigade unit that was very famous and popular throughout the Civil War, almost entirely of Irish troops. On the right, near the Antietam battlefield in Sharpsburg, Maryland, I found this German monument to fallen comrades. And so you see that Germans, Irish, Swiss, some Italian, although not in as large of numbers, Scandinavians and British were able to work their way into the American Civil War. And as I said, 1 out of 4 soldiers by its end were not born in this country. Another major theme, African Americans in the Civil War. You see more and more being written about this. And African Americans made up about 13% of all Union troops by the end of the Civil War. Obviously, if you do the math, you have nearly 40% on the way toward 1/2 of the Union Army being either African American or of foreign-born extraction. The Milliken's Bend Monument here at Vicksburg, Mississippi, honors black troops who fought near the Vicksburg siege. And next door to it is in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, which is the Stones River battlefield, and that's a grave of a USCT, United States Colored Troops, which was the main organization for blacks fighting for the Union. The South, of course, could not really make use of African Americans, decided not to the last month of the war, and of course did not have as many foreign-born troops as well. So these two groups were decidedly advantageous to Union victory as well in the war. Ultimately, too, classroom enrichment, war and society. War and society is kind of a new classification of the old military history. Instead of just discussing and learning about battlefields and troop movements and generals, there's a greater rubric now that incorporates a lot of social history, which I'm more comfortable with and which I have been trained in graduate school. And of course, being always fascinated by military history, I wanted to put both of these things together to enrich the classroom and to reinvigorate some military history offerings that Dr. Bloomfield used to teach. And much of this was in preparation to that. The woman on the left in a traditional gender role, I met at the Monocacy battlefield in Frederick, Maryland. Very much like to participate in these kind of reenactments. And on the right, of course, in the middle of Richmond, Virginia, is the Tredegar Iron Works. The South had so few and so little industrial capacity. This was the major factory system that produced cannon and other commodities for the South. And only by being in Richmond was it able to operate throughout the war, because the Union Army destroyed most everything else during the conflict. Just a quick statistical overview, some 7,000 miles of travel in my trusty CRV, some 13 states, 50 sites, about half of which were Civil War, 3 reenactments, 1,100 photographs, and 65 new books purchased, and historical exhilaration in abundance. And I'd like to thank the Dean, the Executive Committee of Thiel College, my fiancée Donna Unangst, and Professor Karen Schaefer, Dr. David Buck for supporting the projects, Nick Saratori, who did a remarkable job in training me in PowerPoint, and Courtney Polvinelli, who also contributed here. The National Park Service, this is their 100th anniversary, so get out and see a park, and of course the Civil War Trust, and then a few other organizations that helped me out. The Association for the Prevention of Cruelty to Flip-Throat Owners, the Organization for the Continuing Acceptance of Folding Maps, the Society for the Forgiveness of Blatant Fast Food Overindulgence, the Organization for the Absolution of Interstate Driving Profanity, and lastly, the Society for the Understanding of Extreme Book Purchase. Anybody have any questions?
How many historical sites are there in the U.S. having to do with battlefields, forts, etc.? Do you know?
Part of the problem in calculating the ultimate number here is everybody keeps different statistics. The National Park Service is the federal agency that has approximately 440 sites, not all of them history related. So about 28 or so are actually Civil War related, and then another dozen or two are related to other conflicts. For example, the French and Indian War, there's so much fighting in New York and Pennsylvania, but there's only one national site for the French and Indian War, and that's Fort Necessity, Washington, building that near Uniontown, Pennsylvania. Everything else is state site or private collection. So it's hard to calculate all these things, but there's a lot of things out there if you combine state, local, and federal.
What was the reason the French, well, who was it, German, you said Irish?
Irish and German.
And a couple other, whatever, why would they fight in that war?
There were,
on the
there was
side
a,
of the Unions?
which is a very good question. There was a lot of immigration beginning, especially, or I should say accelerating by the 1840s into the 1850s. Most of these immigrants went into the North. They did not want to compete with slave labor in the South. And it was mostly refugees from the Irish potato famines and also German refugees from the failed revolution of 1848 that really swelled northern cities like Philadelphia, Boston, and New York. As I said, very few went south other than some Irish, and they were greeted with a lot of nativism, or xenophobia as we would call it today, and they wanted to demonstrate that they were truly going to be real Americans. So they signed up to try to prove their loyalty to the country. And the war did indeed help both the Irish and to some degree the Germans escape some of that xenophobia and nativist prejudice.
So they were immigrants, but they weren't necessarily citizens, is that right?
There were some second generations that were citizens, but some of the citizenship requirements were shifting at this time because the nativists were very much wanting to close the doors and not let anybody in. So it's varying degrees of citizenship at the time. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Both presenters, I feel I've learned so much history. It's great. Reverend Jayne Thompson, our campus pastor, is actively involved with many of the activities of the Lutheran Church and has taken our students on a lot of travel experiences that have enabled them to strengthen their bonds with the Lutheran Church, including meeting the current presiding bishop. Today, she will share a montage of images and stories that chronicle Thiel students' travels and work with a variety of ELCA groups and events in her presentation titled Adventures with the ELCA. I'm honored to present our campus pastor, Pastor Jayne Thompson.
Thanks to Dr. Hall and all of you who have come to be here at the Thiel Forum. We as Thiel College are related to the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and that denomination, that communion of believers, is part of a greater worldwide Lutheran World Federation. Nearly 4 million members in the ELCA, 10,000 congregations, 26 colleges, of which Thiel is one. 150 campus ministry sites at our public universities, and so much more. Lutherans believe that we are saved by grace alone and free to love our neighbors. And because we're freed by grace, we celebrate the rich diversity of God's good creation and respect others in their faith journeys and questioning pathways. At an ELCA college, we want to support everyone, students, faculty, and staff, to live to your God-given potential. Find your voice and your call to vocation, and then to go forth to make a difference in the world. Part of the vision statement: claim by God's grace for the sake of the world, gather by God's grace for the sake of the world, and sent forth by God's grace for the sake of the world. These adventures and journeys would not be possible without the support of Thiel College, and especially the Department of Student Life and the Religion Department, and all of you for supporting us. Additionally, the Northwestern Pennsylvania Synod has helped greatly with these adventures. And students have gathered because they have prepared a sentence, a concise, excited, and pithy saying about their adventures. They're involved in many of the journeys, and we invited them to add their words. So, off we go. Here we go. The first stop was the national gathering, the National Assembly of the ELCA, in which the Reverend Bishop Elizabeth Eaton was elected as the first female presiding bishop, and in attendance you can see those who had gathered. Before I arrived at Thiel College in August of 2013, I invited staff, faculty, students to travel to Pittsburgh to meet up with then President Troy Van Aken, hosting the ELCA College and University reception. We didn't take a lot of photos, but there's an important photo. And I don't know why this won't advance. Does anybody know why it's stuck?
What's wrong?
The Prezi was stuck.
Oh, there's the arrows.
Okay, we'll just do it this way. It was working. Bishop Eaton, this is a photo of her and then her husband the day they were elected. And so we decided to go on another adventure. And Robert, this is where I'm hoping you have some words and we get to some of the photos. You'll see the numbers of attendees, students who traveled to Chicago, the University of Chicago, at the Rockefeller Chapel, where we had the installation of Bishop Eaton. We were the largest college student gathered in that place, and that was remarkable and quite exciting. So there we are at Chicago Street, leaving our beloved Greenville, and there are the travelers. I don't know what Louis is doing. Maybe it was too early, I'm not sure. There we are in the chapel. Among the travelers was Sabah Pervez, our first IREX grant student from Pakistan, and also, as I'm told, the first Muslim student here at Thiel College, at least as that was explained to me. And Bishop Eaton on her installation. And all of us with the bishop. There are many photos of the bishop. Robert, do you have some words, a pithy sentence, Robert?
It was an extremely enjoyable experience as being a freshman here. It gave me a whole different perspective on just what the church was all about, and having this opportunity to travel, completely priceless. I embraced every moment of it. Very nice.
And you hadn't been out of Pennsylvania.
I was not out of Pennsylvania or New York before I came here. In October, I hit like 4 more states. I was like, oh my gosh, this is like going off my bucket list. It was like really a fun experience. I felt very honored and blessed to have this opportunity.
And it was great that you were there. It is important to recognize that not all the students who travel are Lutheran, and they're not required to do so. We invite everyone from faith backgrounds and denominational backgrounds to travel on these adventures. We did make a stop at Valparaiso University in their beautiful Chapel of the Resurrection. That, of course, is our silly photo. When time allows, we visit congregations. This was a visit to Messiah Lutheran in Ashtabula. That is the home congregation of Fred Migna of our board of trustees and Bishop Eaton's former congregation. Another Pakistani student, Zohaib Kowar, traveled with Amanda Hauptman and Audra Franley, and we gathered for the adult education time. And then also, that's another silly photo. Zohaib was inspired. He said, PJ, can I play my guitar? And so he offered a song in worship, and the members were captivated and inspired by Zohaib. He happens to be the tiny minority of Christians who lives in Pakistan. On to the Interfaith Conference for ELCA colleges and universities. This is the first intentional gathering as we went to Rock Island at Augustana College. And there again, wonderful adventures. Not all of our photos are pretty. This is after we spent the time in the van. I'm often the driver. Andy was also a driver, and we were quite weary. And please forgive me, others of you, if you find photos where you don't look at your best. There are some of me, so just remember, that's how it is when we travel. This is Ibu Patel, the founder of the Interfaith Youth Corps, and phenomenal speaker, a wonderful person, and he is a Muslim who is committed to interfaith cooperation, especially on the work of the college campuses. There we are with the bishop again, and she was a presenter. I said, should we do bunny ears? She said, sure. So there we go. Off we went then to Detroit. The ELC has the Youth Ministry Extravaganza. This shirt is from that gathering, and that is when the youth ministers from all over the country gather in one place prior to the ELCA youth gathering. That is why we went to Chicago. And you can see the list of all the travelers. Two colleagues of mine, Pastor Lori Carson and Pastor Tara Lamont Eastman, traveled with us as well. They are very instrumental in youth ministry in the upstate New York Synod. Always road trip photos before we go in the van. Travelers. Now Usha, another Pakistani student, a Hindu student, traveled with us and did the same kinds of things that Robert did, getting out at the stop. So we crossed over the borders to different states, now this time very snowy, into Michigan. And there we are at the gathering, a large gathering of people committed to youth ministry. Not all adventures are happy times, and this one we had an experience when one of our students had a near fatal medical emergency. Cody Danner had an embolism in his heart saddle, and he was near death when we had to take him to the hospital in Detroit. He survived, as many of you know, came back to college, graduated, and is doing quite well, just got married last May. And other gatherings, other people at the gathering. Now, Sam's not able to be with us, but Sam Sesti is the president of the Lutheran Student Movement chapter here at Thiel College, and he has been invited to participate in national events, and you can see them listed up in the red. These are just some photos that I got from Sam's Facebook page. He loves doing this. He loves going to be part of the Lutheran Student Movement. There's his group. Sam in Chicago. And Lutheran Student Movement's hard at work, doing the work that they do so well. Seventh stop. Now, some of you, be ready. There are many photos because this is a long gathering. It happens every 3 years. The next one will be in Houston. More about that in just a moment. But we invited many students to travel with us. Some were involved in the gathering. We had 2 students, Josh, who's here, and Cole, who are representatives of Thiel College, then traveling with Victoria Pless from admissions and myself to represent the college and talk to young people about the possibilities of coming here as a student. Also, Melissa was there, the servant corps. Jamie Ulrich is not able to be here. Thiel grad Cheryl Marshall is, of course, she's right here. She was working elsewhere in the gathering. All the ELCA colleges have a banner, and there are places to put promotional materials, but most importantly, to engage relationally with people who come to talk to you about your college. Sam Sesti was there with the Lutheran Student Movement. They were doing a habitat build, thus you see all the wood. Jamie, again, was doing parts with the Servants Corps. And then this is our crew. Look at that. Look like we're like the Blues Brothers. So those of you, pithy one sentence things about your time at the gathering. Josh.
I don't really know what to say. There's so much to talk about, especially with all the funny moments we had. I guess we'll have to talk to me about that later. It was a really interesting experience. I remember when you called me early in the beginning of the summer and asked me if I wanted to go. You kind of caught me off guard with that. But no, it was a really good experience. I had pleasure working to represent Thiel. I had fun. It was a wonderful experience.
I had the privilege of being out with the youth because this is a giant youth event with 30,000 Lutherans, most of them high school age, and we actually went out to the city of Detroit. I went out for 3 days, and 2 days because I ended up in the hospital because heat stroke, yay. I don't think Detroit likes us, but it was really interesting to see just the youth come together and help rebuild Detroit. And the people of Detroit were really grateful, and they were kind of, a lot of them were confused though at first, because they were like, why are there a bunch of people in like bright different colored shirts?
Right.
Well, for me, I did a lot of meditating on Thiel's motto there, Lex Mundum Verbum Die, let of the word light of the world, word of God. And because when you travel with PJ, you travel with PJ. I had my first Vietnamese food in Detroit. I had my first, I can't even remember, but we hit every different ethnicity that we could find in Detroit. We had their own type of food. I'd actually been in a car accident a few days before we left for the trip, and it was a very fun experience for me, juxtaposing that with the awesomeness of Detroit, and then having one of my closest friends, now fiance, end up in a hospital. So it's an unforgettable moment for me and a great time.
There's always worship at the gathering. It's very large with 30,000 people. This is Bishop Eaton at the closing worship. Off we went then in March to spring break at First Trinity Church down at the Judicial Square in Washington, D.C. And this is at the 6th and I Street Synagogue, very famous synagogue. This is Rabbi Shira, and beautiful worship the last night of our trip. These are just highlights. This is historic Luther Place Memorial Church. They have these beautiful paintings on the outside of their church. And Martin Luther King is one, Dorothy Day is another. On the last Friday, we also attended the National Islamic Center worship, and a powerful experience indeed. Dan? We zoomed off to the Vocation of a Lutheran College Conference, and this is preparing global leaders for religious diversity. And you'll see the attendees. Bishop Eaton was there again. She is awesome. We went over a little side trip to Luther Seminary. And then Ibu Batel again was presenting. This is one of his staff members, and this is former Bishop Mark Hansen doing a panel about interfaith relationships and engagement. I tried to do bunny ears, and he said that would be fine, but he was too tall. And so it's funny. Sorry, Melissa, about...
It's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. And the last stop, most recently to Camp Lutherland, we traveled to an ELCA-related camp for an all-campus ministry retreat. So several of us traveled. There's our crew. Jamie Ulrich, who can't be here right now for her commitments, played guitar for worship. And we had low ropes courses. We prepared for high ropes courses. And we did high ropes courses. So the stops don't stop with 10. We have more coming up when we invite you to travel with us on these journeys. One of the stops comes our way here at Thiel College, as we will host a youth gathering for teenagers in the ELCA and their friends over the Martin Luther King holiday. Nationally acclaimed slam poet Natasha T. Miller will be with us, and we leave you with her words. This is her closing. Can you please?
Good morning. All right, I'm gonna say one thing before I get into my poem, and that thing is thank you for coming to my city, for bringing people hope, for doing the work that you've done over the last week. Please give it up for yourselves for that work. A little over a year and a half ago, I lost my brother, and you couldn't tell me during that time that I would be here today reciting poems. But one thing that I continue to learn is that God doesn't have to tell you anything. God shows you everything. So thank you, people, for being a part of that God that shows us to keep, that continues to help us believe. So this is a poem that I wrote last night for you all, and I hope that you take this same excitement back into your own hometowns. In 2005, one of the deadliest hurricanes swept through eastern northern America, killing over 1,800 people and causing more than $190 billion worth of damage. 2013, 2 bombs went off during the Boston Marathon. 2001, the World Trade Center, New York, every 3 hours and 19 minutes, someone in Chicago is shot or murdered, while beautiful Hawaii is trying to stop their homeland from being invaded by big business and protect their children from human trafficking. Every city, everywhere, is going through something. 6 months after the hurricane, the people of New Orleans were on the streets dancing to the beat and blood of their ancestors. The day after the towers fell, the people of New York picked up the pieces and returned to work with their morning coffee and newspapers that were still listing off the names of their loved ones that were buried underneath the dust. In 2014, the Boston Marathon had the second most participants since 1996, and the people of Hawaii are still singing today. You're going to return to a city. You're going to return to a city that will always need you, and you're going to wrap your arms around it like it's the last person you'll ever hug. And when the music of fellowshipping with 30,000 people has stopped playing and you have questions in the loneliest hours, you're going to remember that God is a DJ that takes your requests all night. And on days when you feel like hope is not enough, insecurities will become tall buildings, but confidence is a cord connected to your faith, and you go bungee jumping every time you feel the bricks of not being enough trying to build a home, and your smile, that DJ, will always be somewhere with our emotions on the turntable, spinning all of our bad days into vacations. We never have to return from. You are something bigger. You are a part of something bigger. Me, who lost my brother to the streets. You, who lost your aunt to cancer. And you, who lost your faith and the fire of your life. We have to know that all of our scars create a roadmap that leads us to our own resurrection. We are never lost, just discovering new paths. We know that death is a part of life. Suicide don't cure depression. Judgment is for the weak, and we are strong and in it even when we are alone together. Thank you, ELCA. You have been amazing. Thank you. So here's the thing. I told one of my best friends, when I first told him, I said, hey, I have a show in front of 30,000 people. And his response to me was, yo, that selfie gonna be crazy. And I forgot to do it last time, so this is my one opportunity. If you wanna be in it, make noise.
Natasha T. Miller is coming here in January, and we are blessed. And you are blessed. Thank you for the journey, for going with us on our adventures, and all of you for being fabulous on the adventures. Okay. Any questions, comments, other things?
I think there's a couple of them that didn't get to speak. I'm not sure.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Angela was part of our adventure. She's been doing things and joined chapel staff recently, and you had a chance to go with us to Camp Lutherland, and you had never done high ropes, and you did them all. And that was anything about that?
It was so much fun. It was such a great experience because, like, a bunch of us just got to get together and we did trust exercises, and then there was some of the low ropes courses that we have to all work as a team to accomplish it, and it was just really nice getting to spend the day with everybody.
And Philip also has been traveling with us on these adventures. And Philip, how has that been for you?
Well, it's really been exciting for me, especially because, like you said, when Robert first got here, he never really expanded, and I'm kind of the same thing. I've never really been outside of my comfort zone, and since joining chapel staff, I've been able to reach out a little bit further and past the boundaries that have locked me into my own little world, and just seeing just the vast majority that the world is just really exciting.
Mm-hmm. And Nolan as well has been traveling with us, went to DC and some other things. And how about for you?
Well, one of the objections, when I came to Thiel, one of the objections I wanted to fulfill was experience the church Catholic in the Lutheran sense. And I really got to enjoy that, see the conversation, see some notable people in the Lutheran church, the ELCA Lutheran church, and really glad to go down to DC because I saw some videos on historical churches down there, and it's really starstruck me when I saw these churches. And then once I went to the camp, it was very beautiful, and I really enjoyed the Love Oaks course.
So a round of applause for our students. And my husband Jack, who travels with us often, Dan Epley, who travels with us. And thanks to all of you. Hope you can be a part of other adventures in the future. Thank you, Dr. Hall.
Thanks especially to our presenters today. Excellent presentations. Thank you. Our next forum will be in the new year, January 12th, and we'll have Dr. Pete Rydberg, who will discuss a grant he received jousting with Shakespeare. Professor Jesse Amor, who will discuss his work on 2 bronze casts he did, and senior student Maddie Melly, who will present on her Byron Hines Scholarship experience to Italy this past summer. Happy Thanksgiving to all of you, and thank you for attending today. Thank you.